ahead and get started. Since it is 7:30, our first item is the priority one, sidewalks. So we'll just go ahead and turn it over to Steve Neighbor, who will give us the update.
Okay. Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council, my name is Steve Neighbor, Des Moines City resident and Des Moines City engineer. And Scott and I did not coordinate this yesterday, so just, and Malcolm, right? Yes. I'm excited to do this presentation on sidewalks. As you all know, our City Council, I'm proud as a resident and the city engineer, the amount of infrastructure investment we've all made is incredible. And so this is to talk about priority one sidewalks and filling sidewalk gaps. I do want to, if you recall back in January, we had made an aggressive approach to bring our sidewalk curb ramps up to ADA compliance. So we had done like over 6,000 sidewalk curb ramps that we had upgraded to meet the Americans with Disabilities Act, and that's making them depressed curb ramps and adding the detectable warnings, which are for folks who are visually impaired. We've done about 6,000 of those, spending about $14 million over the past 9 years. And we've also been attacking existing sidewalks. As you know, the abutting property owners are responsible for the maintenance of the existing sidewalks next to their homes. However, we take care of not only the sidewalks in front of our city infrastructure, we also take care of sidewalks that are maybe has some defects that are next to due to street trees. And then we also have a subsidy program that if residents based on income requirements can apply for a subsidy program. And so whenever you see there's a contract for sidewalk replacement program, generally though it's about $500,000. This year we've got a bigger program, about 600,000. That is what that is for. And so again, we've done a lot of infrastructure improvements in that nature. This is actually to focus on, if you remember, from Move DSM, we had identified well over 600 miles of sidewalk gaps throughout the city, and actually Move DSM put a focus on 180 miles that are considered priority one sidewalk gaps, and those would be gaps primarily near schools, but also access to bus routes and along major corridors. And so we adopted Move DSM in 2018, and we all got together in January of 2019 and put together an aggressive plan to start attacking these sidewalk gaps. And so there are a couple ways to attack those, and I'm going to kind of show this a little later. But one, we do have, in our capital improvement program booklet, we have a dedicated fund source toward to priority one sidewalks. But we also have been attacking these with our own CIP projects. If we reconstructed a street, we've put in the sidewalks, and you're all familiar with a lot of the street reconstruction we've got going on from Indianola Avenue to Guthrie. We've put in sidewalks along there, East Douglas. I can name a whole bunch, and so we've been attacking them that way as well as we do street projects or sewer projects even. Yeah.
When you talk about sidewalks, and you just mentioned along Easton, but we put in it's a trail.
Yep.
So the neighbors aren't responsible for shoveling that, correct? I just want to make sure.
Yep, that's correct. And so in that case, Councilmember Westergaard is correct. When we put in a separate shared use path or multi-use trail, when it's a city trail, the city actually does the maintenance of that. But I bring it up just because that one, it does address multiple things. It did feel there was no side. The kids were walking in the grass along the houses there, and so it does address multiple. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And Steve, just a quick question: when you mention schools, are we talking public schools only, or all schools private?
So in reality, and so our transportation planner, Jeff Wiggins, has done an incredible job with the planning effort here. We are looking at all schools, but the big analysis, Jeff spent a lot of time with Des Moines Public Schools and actually created this it's a impressive GIS system where geographic information system where they mapped out where students are, and it's not just where students are today, but he actually worked with the public schools on where their recommended walk routes are. And so that analysis was done with Des Moines Public Schools, but we are cognizant of where all the schools are when we're filling gaps. Yeah. So, but again, very impressive work that Jeff Wiggins and our school district staff worked together on. And again, yes, the analysis maps out where students are today, but the focus is on those recommended walk routes, because we know obviously kids get older and move to, go on to different schools, junior high and high school. So yeah. So we developed quite a plan in January of 2019 to how do we attack this, and again, a lot of that was, if you look in the upper right, I'm not, again, led by Jeff, he developed a kind of an analysis on where our gaps are, and so the red are gaps and the green are where there are sidewalks today, and then we took it from a kind of a 3-year rolling plan, and so all within this presentation you'll see kind of the map of like the next few years or next few phases of this program. And also we've been working with, as site developments come in, when there's a gap, we have been asking that the development put that sidewalk in along their development as well. So I mentioned before, filling gaps of street reconstruction work. We've also been doing that throughout our city from a number of projects there. And again, that is not necessarily just priority one. A lot of times those can be any sidewalk gaps, but now's the time to do it when we've got the whole street tore up. And then again, that focus is ultimately we'd like to have sidewalks on both sides of the street, especially along multi-lane corridors and multi-lane roads, along street reconstruction projects. We've started with kind of within the neighborhoods on just at least trying to get it on one side of the street, just to make progress to give people someplace to walk. But again, when we talk about those major corridors and when we get real close to schools, like around the school perimeter, you'll see we've been putting them on both sides. And again, we obviously want to follow the Americans with Disabilities Act and putting these in that are ADA compliant. 5 foot wide is that kind of at least standard that I've always dealt with here, and when I worked in Illinois and in Wisconsin, it's just kind of been the new standard over the past 20 years for them. And then, years ago, I think this is, I don't think one has been done since I've been here, but so shortly, it's probably been at least 9-10 years. There used to be a sidewalk assessment policy where folks could request to fill a sidewalk gap, and then there would be an assessment, so they would have a line show up on their tax bill to pay for that sidewalk gap. That's been rescinded because we have an aggressive program to fill the gaps ourselves. So that's just kind of a summary of the things we talked about in that January 2019 meeting. So these are kind of the highlights. Again, Move DSM, 667 miles of sidewalk gaps in our city. And then with the focus in the lower left, I put the 180 miles that are considered priority one again. And those are proximity to schools, bus stops, proximity to commercial nodes, and when we say connectivity, again, we've filled some very critical gaps around our city that for example, along Euclid Avenue, East Euclid Avenue, from East 29th down, there were worn grass paths along the street, and now those have been filled. That would be kind of an example of connectivity for folks. So that's kind of been that's our focus, and the focus that was identified and developed in January 2019. Yeah.
How is the city responding to sidewalks in industrial areas?
So sidewalks in industrial areas, we've been trying to put them in as well. I know in Central Place, for example, we we identified kind of some main north, south, east, west routes to try and get them in as a priority. They're not typically they're not priority one, but again, we still ultimately would want to have sidewalks for the folks that work there and as well. So, yeah. And then I mentioned before about the dedicated funding source, and so you can see here, this is the table that kind of outlines that, and so you can see our city manager's office and finance have been injecting local option sales and service tax and ARPA, so it fluctuates. But I think if you average those out, I think we come out to like 3.1 or 3 point, somewhere in that range. Maybe we're doing a 5K. I guess it wouldn't be a 5K, but 3.1 million a year in funding. And that was kind of what we talked about in January, was to try and keep it close to that 3 million a year. And so you can see that this is the table of what's been spent. So.
And Steve, as you knock off the low-hanging fruit for sidewalks that don't require a retaining wall or something else, is what you can do with $3 million shrinking pretty quickly in terms of the number of linear feet or total miles?
That's a great question, and the answer is yes, it is. It actually is shrinking pretty quickly, because it really, to be honest with you, in FY20 we really did kind of those lower hanging fruit where there was already kind of a nice graded area for them, but really shortly after that we ramped up, and that is the challenge. I mean, when then Assistant City Manager Holstead interviewed me in 2015, and he asked me, what are the most challenging jobs you do? And I said, I've rebuilt entire downtowns, built bridges, buildings, you name it. There's nothing more challenging than a sidewalk project. And I know that sounds bizarre, but you will never have a more engaged public when you put something in their front yard. And then also the sidewalk gaps we have, there's a reason there's not a sidewalk there, because one, the topography makes it brutally challenging to get it in, or we don't have the right-of-way, and so we've had to acquire a lot of right-of-way to get some of these in, or it can be anything from drainage to utilities in the way. So to answer your question, to be honest with you, really probably starting right away in that FY22 range, we really have already been seeing some of those very challenging. And I'll show you a slide there. I think in general, when we average out all these fiscal years, we're now hitting up to about, it's 190, almost $200 a foot is what our average has been. So that is challenging, because when we think about if I was just to build a sidewalk in a nice, flat open space, it would only be like 75 a foot, and so this is, yeah.
Fortunately, there aren't any hills in Ward 4.
Yep. But yeah, this is the table that kind of shows the debt. And again, this is just the CIP sheet SW081. If folks that are online or in the crowd, want to go to our capital improvement program is on our webpage. You can either open up the program and search SW81 or Neighborhood Sidewalk Program. This is just dedicated funding just for sidewalks. This is not the only money we've been spending on this, so I'll show something in a little bit here. So this is kind of a summary. I'm not expecting anyone to read this. I have hard copies available, and I think in PDFs available, and even larger prints available of this. But this is just kind of a snapshot to show you where the focus is. The pink is what's been done over the past 5 years or so, and then the colors red, yellow, blue, green, orange, and dark blue are what's coming and planned in the future. And so in the lower right there, you can kind of see some of the numbers that have been tackled, and so over the past few years. And actually that lower right is actually more of a summary of the pink, primarily in 2020.
If I want to see it so I can see the streets, so I can expand.
We can post that and put that on a website now that we'll send out a link
Be
to.
able to see the street.
Yep, absolutely. Yep. Appreciate that. Yeah. Let me see if I had. So here we go. This is the table when I talked about, how we're attacking these. So the top line, sidewalk CIP SW081, that line should match the slide I previously sent. So that kind of matches that capital improvement program. The lower line that says other CIP projects, you can see we've done a lot of mileage there. That is from, when we do road reconstruction projects, we've been tackling these sidewalks from Indianola Avenue, Fleur Drive, East Douglas Avenue, projects like that where we're also doing sidewalks with the street reconstruction. And so this is the snapshot. And so, again, you can see in the lower, that's just what it came out to. Average cost per lineal foot, $199 a lineal foot. And so that's the pricing added up from basically really the top line, if you will. Obviously, the other CIP projects, the pricing comes in a little better because we're already there for street reconstruction. But that $199 is based off of the top line, SW81. So.
Are the other CIP projects, like that's a mix of priority 1, 2, and 3?
Absolutely.
So it's not. So those miles are not all priority 1 side.
That's a great question. Yep, those miles. I think really if we looked at all these mileage, I think if I remember it was about 75% of this was about priority 1. So 25% of this total mileage would not be priority 1 because Councilman Mandelbaum is correct. Some of these street reconstruction projects, they're addressing sidewalks that are not priority 1. So, but we're still putting them in because we ultimately want sidewalks there. Right. So, yeah. So if we go to the next slide, this is the total summary. And so since in 5 years we put in 27 miles of sidewalks, and so I mentioned that I think it's if like 22 of that or so, it would be priority 1 numbers. So if we really boiled it down to that way, but and then when you look at the sidewalks that we have coming this coming fiscal year, we're looking to be at 31 miles in 6 fiscal years. So. Yeah, got a long ways to go, but again, I'm proud. This is a lot. I mean, 27 miles is it's when you add it all up, it's a lot. Is a lot of size. Yeah. So, yeah.
So at the current pace, like we've probably got like another 30 years, maybe more like 35. If it's harder just to get through the priority 1.
That's correct. Yep. So originally it was, we talked about, well, could we do 180 in 20 years? It's more like 180 and 40 would be the total. And so we've already done, you say 20 something. So then, like you said, the 30 to 35 would be, 30 years would probably be closer. But again, that's
right. Unless we made slightly different funding choices to bump up the amount of work that we did on something like this.
Yep, the funding could definitely would help. Obviously, there is, then when we talk about funding, it's also staff capacity, and that's a total, real estate and all the folks that are involved in putting these together. How much, and then contractor workload. But yeah, it starts with the funding too. Yeah.
Well, I mean that would be helpful to understand. I mean, how much of a barrier, like if we wanted to do an extra 2 miles of sidewalk, how much of a barrier would staff time be for something like that? I mean, when you're talking real estate and design.
Yeah, I mean, an extra, so we've been doing about 4.5 to 5.5 miles a year. So I guess we'd be adding about a third more is what, if we did a couple more miles. So I don't know if it'd probably be more of a direct correlation. You think you're talking like, maybe one engineer and the real estate is a tough one to be incremental because they obviously work on everything we do from dispositions to street projects and sewer projects. So yeah, I don't know if I have a way to it'd be hard to directly answer that, but I guess I just want to be cognizant of like how does that fit into the whole picture, with everything we do.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just trying to, I mean, yeah, it's obviously a fraction of some employees' time. I'm
Right.
just trying to get a sense of how much, if we added the extra work, I mean, how much of a barrier would we need to be thinking about beyond just
Yeah.
the dollars to get the sidewalk in the ground?
Yeah, and again, now when and I appreciate that and agree. I think that, and it's hard for me to answer now. What we do when we hit these, we've had a very aggressive attack on overall infrastructure, to say the least, and now we do have to supplement with consultants. Consultants generally are about 15% more, just at a minimum, and really it comes down to more like 25% more when you factor in the true billing rates. And so we can do more. It's just trying to balance that. When do we add a physical staff member versus supplement with consultants? But yeah.
Go, Chris. You're next, I think.
Thanks. I was going to build off of Josh's, but a different way. Now we're 5 years in or 6 years in, and we're sustaining this. Have we gone back to look to see if this is a way that we could maximize our resources with an internal crew?
So looking at it from should we hire more staff to address this versus
I'm saying the actual contract.
Actually.
The construction.
Oh.
I mean,
For
I
the
know
sidewalks.
early on, I mean, I was here when we started it as part of the lost priorities, but you just never know how it's going to work or how it's going to sustain. But if we have 20 years in front of us, does that get us to the point where it's worth the cost of equipment? And I say that in part because if we could cut the cost by 30%, we can do 30% more sidewalks for the same money.
Yeah, one of the challenges would be seasonal, construction seasonal.
Yeah.
But I think it's worth looking at. We can run some numbers.
We do employ 7-month seasonal employees at Public Works, don't we?
Right, but you wouldn't put them you'd have to have supervisors and other city
Right.
staff.
Yeah, but you could
But-
hire the labor portion of it as a seasonal.
And then other challenges would be when we address things like replacing fences and if there's tree removal, and just kind of some of the other caveats that go with sidewalk programs that how would we it's not just adding a concrete crew, right? It's the folks that do the grading and the fences and the tree removal and retaining walls, and not to say that we couldn't get those people, but then the more people you get, what do you do with them during those other times? Or quite frankly, I know I don't want to speak for Scott and Nick, but they've had to the costs, the funding had kind of fluctuated, trying to find a way to try and keep that 3 million average. And so, you saw some years we had bigger amounts and some years we had lesser amounts. And so then again, it's managing that whole workload becomes some of the challenge,
We'll look at it.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see.
Steve, 2 questions. One, do you feel you have a pretty good list of contractors who are interested in bidding on sidewalks? I mean, are there enough contractors that you feel you're getting competitive bids?
I think with the 3 million we've been hitting, seeing good competitive bids, and we've been seeing a number of bidders. So I would say yes. Right now we've been
Second question is the ADA ramps. I've had some complaints about the ADA ramps are great, but in the winter some of those are traps for freezing water, and just the footing. Is there are they getting designed well enough to allow for those winter months when the water is trapped there, or is there anything different we can do, or is it just, it is what it is?
So, yep, they can be a challenge and to try and get the grades to work and get them to a near intake. In terms of drainage, that's just an art. We've got to detail out the elevations like at every corner of the panel and around the curbs to get those to work. This is not necessarily related to drainage, but the ADA did just last August release the new public rights-of-way accessibility guidelines. They're called PROAG, that allowed us to. They used to require us to put the sidewalk detectable warning panels right at the edge of the concrete, which I was never a fan of. Actually, the issue is because you have an actual cast iron panel right at the edge of the concrete with no concrete cover between it. Well, they just changed that in August to allow us to at least have an inch or two, up to 2 inches. So at least we got 2 inches to work with that panel to kind of better trowel around it and get the grades to work better. So that's not that won't necessarily. I think that'll help from installing that panel. But the drainage is really down to we've got to detail every single grade around that ramp, so to make that work.
And do we have some liability on those?
If we install them incorrectly, but if we directly don't follow our design guidance, there could be some, but it's not. But there's a whole wide range of things that could go into something like that.
Sorry that I brought attorneys into the mix.
Yeah, again, thank you, Honorable Mayor and Council, and again, appreciate you all. This is 27 miles of gaps. I think, again, when we look at why we all show up every day, that is awesome. That's leaving us in a better place than we were, certainly better than we were 5 years ago. That's 27 miles is incredible. So.
We have a long way to go.
Yep, we did.
Ward 4.
Yep, yeah, I know the map.
Yeah,
So.
Ward 4.
Yeah, and there was a lot of red to start. If you look at the map, you can see that. Yeah,
That goes back to when they built homes in Ward 4.
Yep.
Not that long ago, they didn't
Yeah.
put sidewalks. So we're catching up for the areas that didn't think they needed a sidewalk.
right.
So
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah.
for
Thank
your
you.
work. So the next item, who is doing traffic calming? You're back up.
Yep. And actually, Honorable Mayor, Members of City Council, Steve Neighbor, Des Moines resident, Des Moines City engineer. And I mentioned Jeff Wiggins and all the excellent work that he has done on the sidewalk program. He's going to do this presentation on traffic calming. He's done a lot of the planning and work behind this. And I did want to point out, I apologize, I didn't mention, I got Dave Camp, Tom Block, and Jen Dokovich with me as well. And they've been so instrumental with not only the sidewalks, but this program as well. But I'm going to turn it right over to Jeff, who's our transportation planner, to present this one. So thank you, Jeff. Thank you.
Could you take one of these and pass them along? Thanks. Hi, Jeff Wiggins, Transportation Planner in Traffic and Transportation. Thanks for the opportunity to give an update on the traffic calming program. This is a 6-year review. In many ways, for those of you who were around on November 1st, 2022, I did a 5-year review, so this is a retread of that presentation with updated details and information. So this just gives you a quick guideline of what we're going to look at here. So what is the traffic calming program? Established back in 2017. What I heard at that time and then again today is that council members say that traffic calming and speeding in residential neighborhoods is the #1 concern that they hear from their constituents. So the intent of the program back then was to define a clear process for evaluating and implementing projects with the goals of reducing vehicular speeds, discouraging cut-through traffic, and creating more livable neighborhoods that encourage walking and biking. The intent of the program was to address approximately 2 to 4 projects for implementation on an annual basis. The budget is $150,000 a year. Here you have a spread of a number of projects that have been implemented over the years. Some of the traffic calming projects that are in place today actually predate the formal adoption of the traffic calming program, but all of these are in place today and across all 4 wards. So, as an engineering department employee, I have to start with data. What is the volume of requests that have come in? So as you can see, I've split it out both by quarter and by month. Basically, quarters 2 and 3, the warmer months, when people are outside, tend to look outside the front door, notice what's going on in front of them. I see a spike in requests and concerns from the residents. And then on the right, you can see by quarter on the right, rather, and that trend line, the dotted line, simply rising up over time. Just the sheer volume of requests that comes in on an annual basis has increased year over year. This is the same as the map that you have in your hand now, hopefully. Yeah.
On those requests for service, or do you categorize those?
Yep. It's coming here in just one slide forward. You anticipate where I'm going. So again, this is the where are those requests coming from. Actually, it's on this slide. So over the course of 6 1/4 years now, we've received approximately 250 inquiries. 3/4 of those go no further than, hey, I got speeding on my street, but then I never hear back from that person after sending the informational email. A handful of those 28 have gone to traffic studies. That means that we've gone out, collected data for 72 hours, and it doesn't meet the parameters of the program, and so it moves no further and stays right there. On the right-hand side, those red projects are the 20 that have been implemented. 1 project has been rejected by the residents on the street, and 11 of those projects are queued up for implementation currently. And we'll get to that list again in a moment.
Jeff, a lot of the inquiries are residential streets. Tell me, let's go over how you can get this on your street so the folks at home can understand, because I know we have a lot of inquiries where they don't meet the statute.
Yep. 2 slides ahead. So I'll slip ahead here and then come
No,
back.
that's fine. And if you got it down, that's fine.
So the program was created again back in 2017, and the basic parameters have not changed since that time. So how do you initiate a request? So first of all, it has to happen in an official manner. It can't come from an individual, has to come from one of 3 locations, either from a member of the city council or the mayor, from the neighborhood association, or from a petition signed by at least 60% of the folks who live on that particular street. So that's how you start the petition and start the request to the city. Once that request has been made to the city, we go out and collect the data. And the data, as I mentioned, is collected over 3 days, 72 hours continuously. And we don't do a Monday, Friday, or weekend. We do a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday typically. And we see what the speeds are and what the volume is. And so those 2 basic parameters are what we're looking at. In terms of volume, we're looking at 500 to 4,000 vehicles a day. So in other words, we don't want to have streets that are not used as enough, that we're not getting bang for our buck in terms of investment over time. And at the upper end, we don't want to treat streets that are serving other roles in the system. So if, for example, they're a transit route, a heavy truck route, a emergency response route, there's other things going on, and we don't use the residential traffic calming program for those purposes. In terms of speed, that's the other parameter that we're looking at. So we use something called the 85th percentile speed. 85th percentile speed is simply the speed at which or below 85% of people are traveling on that particular street. So it does not grab that top 15% of super speeders, the racers in the neighborhood. but it's a consistent measurement that we use across all of our projects. It shows you, it's kind of a first gut feel for how people feel comfortable, the vast majority of people feel comfortable traveling on that particular street. And so if that 85th percentile speed is within 5 miles an hour of the posted speed limit, again, most of these are residential neighborhoods, 25-mile-an-hour speed zones. There are a few exceptions, but that's the vast majority of them. So if that 85th percentile speed is 30 or below, we consider it within normal conditions for similar residential streets within our community. If that number is 31 or higher, then it's eligible for the program, provided that the volume is within that 500 to 4,000 vehicles a day. And then we go into the actual program, and it's there on the screen. Obviously, you can't read that, but that's the same one that was adopted in 2017 and revised based on the feedback that I received in November of 22, adopted in 2023. The upper right-hand corner, also I've put in a QR code, and that'll take you directly to the traffic calming webpage, which is a clearinghouse for information. Again, photographs like I showed you earlier of projects that have been implemented in Des Moines, and an FAQ of how you get started and all the rest of the information, as well as a downloadable version of what you see on the screen, which is the actual program guidelines.
And it's on the city website too, correct?
Yep. Take your phone, point it at that QR code, it'll get you there. Yep.
And first of all, Jeff, you are so good about coming to neighborhood meetings. I've been in the meetings. Sometimes it gets a little loud, and you handle it so well. So, it's just a really compliment to you guys on the Traffic and Transportation Division, because I see you there working, and you're doing a great job. My question is I know in December, the new manual on the uniform traffic control devices came out. So I've looked at that, and I'm just a layperson, so I don't understand all the technical things. But it talked about not using the 85th percentile if it were near busy places where there were people, such as parks. And I know, like in Sheridan Gardens, they had requested it. It didn't work because the traffic, it didn't seem to be deemed necessary. But are we looking at that 85th percentile differently around parks and where there are lots of kids and people congregating?
Short answer, no.
No.
So as laid out in the program and in the guidelines that are to
Okay.
the right there, those are the two things we
So
look at.
that's, okay.
But it is the residential traffic calming program, so typically, we're not going by parks or commercial nodes, but that's a good counterexample. Ashby Park, 38th Street's another good example. There are several where we have passed by parks, but typically, we do not look above and beyond that. We have, in a couple instances, taken additional data. Say, for example, if there was concern related with, say, grandstanding, weekend activity, racing, things like that, we've gone back and collected on the weekend. Did the same thing on Southeast 22nd, a project that's up for construction this summer near the county baseball complex. But no, what's in place
So
is
you're
simply
staying
that.
with this, even though the manual is saying you can
Go ahead.
take exception.
Honorable Mayor, Member City Council, Steve Neighbor, City Engineer. Good question. So when the MUTCD is talking about the 85th percentile, it's really talking about setting speed limits. And so not just using the 85th percentile to determine what the actual posted speed limit is. This right here is really actually just a criteria we used to determine, is there a habitual speeding problem? Okay. And like Jeff said, I have people that race down my street, right? We all have, unfortunately, people who speed down my street, but there has to be some criteria to decide where we do this. Where do we prioritize the limited funds we have to do traffic calming? And so what we said is, well, let's prioritize those where there are habitual speeders, and so we're just using this as a benchmark. But you are correct. So for determining speed limits, for posting speeds, we do not, and actually for the past, even about a year before the new MUTCD came out, we've gone away from we actually run 3 different speed models to determine what should the posted speed limit be. And some of those are more based on the context, like you alluded to, like parks or what's along the roadway, not just the data of what the speed is. But this is that Jeff's talking about is the criteria for where do we spend our resource, to prioritize our resources to do the traffic calming.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
And that speed evaluation, just incidentally, that Steve was talking about, is done anytime we're doing a reconstruction on a roadway. We go and evaluate and make sure that, according to those 3 methods, we take whatever the lowest recommendation is. So I'll backtrack just for a moment. So this is what you have on the back side of the sheet that was distributed around. And simply this gives you a look at how much things have cost over time. So as you recall, I mentioned that the goal of the program back in 2017 was to address 2 to 4 projects per year. And this is simply where the rubber meets the road. How are we doing with our current budget? There's projects are not all created equal. Some projects are very simple, so to speak. Cost very little because all you have to do is change out signs or perhaps change some striping. Other projects have significant costs associated with them. For example, if we introduce a raised crosswalk or a raised intersection, things of that nature. So one thing to note here, all the prices in that column are construction only, so they do not include the planning time, the time for collecting the data, the time for a consultant to prepare the design, et cetera, et cetera. On the right-hand side here, you have a quick summary. The items in red column are the ones that have been implemented, the traffic calming devices that have been put on the streets in the last handful of years since the program was initiated. And then on the right in the yellow column are the projects that are queued up in the next few years. Again, you can see that the lion's share of the projects have gone towards speed humps, but there are a number of traffic calming devices that have been part of the program over the years.
Bar.
An optical speed bar is a striping method that you use, and essentially you place bars across the street in one direction. So it's where you have a change in speed limit and you're going from a higher speed to a lower speed, or even if there's not a change in speed limit, you're trying to, again, just like any traffic calming device, get people to come down to an appropriate speed. And those bars are at different spacing in between the bars. So say, for example, the first 2 bars might be 200 feet apart. The next bar might be at 150, then 100, et cetera, and they get a little bit closer. And so there's an optical illusion of going faster than you're actually going because of the pattern of those bars across the roadway.
Okay.
There's, in Iowa, we have a number of locations, especially in northeast Iowa, where you've seen these in the transition from a county highway into a rural community. So that transition zone to remind people, hey, here's a place where you ought to be slowing down. Guidance for the program. The foundation of this program is the FHWA guidance. Over the last couple of years, we've had additional guidance from folks at ITE and NACTO. Des Moines program is based on best practices from across the country, and we do borrow and look at what's happening in other municipalities to make sure that we're keeping up with the Joneses, make sure we're doing things correctly. Some lessons learned over the last 5-6 years. All requests are unique, not a surprise. We need to follow our guidelines to make sure that we're treating everybody equally. We prioritize projects in the order in which they are received. I tell folks when they come to me initially that it takes 2 to 3 years for implementation from the day they express a concern till the time that they see something on the street. That timeline can fluctuate a little bit depending on the number of projects that come in the door and available funding. Initially, we were not tracking staff time. Now we're doing that to get a true reflection of what the costs of the program are. We've bundled our projects for bid packages and created standard design details. I mentioned the guidance from ITE, NACTO, FHWA. Device spacing does matter. Put them too close together, you're wasting your money. Put them too far apart, you're losing that efficacy, and we've had that in both directions in our program so far. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, is that speed humps, as I mentioned earlier, are both the most commonly used and probably the most effective, greatest bang for the buck in reducing that speed through residential neighborhoods.
And Jeff, are the speed humps now installed by a third party as opposed to Public Works?
Yes.
So could we save some money if we brought that in-house? I mean, a speed hump, it's generally asphalt, right? So if the city crew knew how wide the speed hump's supposed to be and how tall it's supposed to be, I gather you have some standards, that we should be able to maybe do more work if we brought that in-house.
Yep, I'm actually getting there in a couple slides. If you can hold for just 2 seconds.
I can hold even longer.
Okay, perfect. But that's a great question and one that came up at a previous council work session, so one that we wanted to address today. Projects, I'll go through this backwards. What are some of the challenges that we've experienced? This is the neighborhood traffic calming program. As such, it's eligible for neighborhood streets, residential streets. It is not intended for higher speed or higher volume streets. So that is possible, but that would not be part of a traffic calming program. That would be part of a speed management program. So it's not a deficiency, it's a characteristic of this program. We initially thought that we would be doing a bunch of these studies through on-call consultants. In fact of matter, all save for one project have been done in-house by our crews in traffic and transportation. And then finally, and first bullet, we do have more projects queued up for implementation than we currently have funding for. Down below, you have that list in the blue box. 4 traffic studies that are pending, 4 projects that are currently being reviewed through the Neighborhood Association, 7 projects that are in design through Dave's team and the consultants, and 2 projects that are queued up for implementation this summer.
And are most of these just the speed bumps? Are they islands? Are they bump outs? Are they, I mean, can we?
That's the list of projects there. On the right-hand side, you can see what's queued up in those 11 projects that I mentioned.
Right.
26 speed humps, a few raised crosswalks, et cetera.
Okay.
A lot of hope.
Yeah.
So 2 items that I did want to bring to your attention today. The second is Councilmember Voss's question. The first has to do with the policy, and in short, we are trying to decide internally within traffic and transportation and engineering whether we needed to amend the existing policy where it relates to the meetings with the neighborhood association. The current policy is that I go to the neighborhood association twice. First time to bring the traffic study, present the information, and bring a list of potential traffic calming devices that have been recommended by our department as applicable to that particular context. I come back later, a second time, to the neighborhood association and say, I heard what you said, here's the concept that we propose, and as soon as I get a thumbs up and consensus from those present, then I go ahead and send out the survey cards to the neighbors who live along that particular street. If, as we move forward, we're going to lean harder on speed humps and only speed humps, if a project, the way we're proposing it now, if a project only entails speed humps, we propose going to the neighborhood association simply one time rather than 2 times, so that we can simply say, here's the traffic data again, and what we do recommend on this particular street is speed humps, and we come with a concept plan in hand. And so in reviewing the policy, we didn't see anything specifically saying you cannot do that in a single meeting, so we don't believe that it's necessary to change the existing policy, but I just did want to bring that to your collective attention as we move forward.
I think going once is nice and generous. I mean, if we're going to try and streamline these, I think there's better uses of your time.
I would agree.
Steve needs help on sidewalks.
Once is plenty.
Yeah.
You're just going to
And-
do the humps.
So, Jeff, you only get comments from the people that live on the street.
I only get, only the folks who live on the street receive a survey card, and
Survey
it's
card.
the responses from those who turn in the survey card that count towards whether or not it moves forward for implementation or not.
But it's residents that live a block off of it that also are impacted by the speed hump, right? Yeah.
The problem with all that, really the whole problem is that we have to spend this kind of money for people not following the law. If they would just slow down. That's why I go to every meeting, I just tell everybody to slow down, because many of the people in the neighborhood are the ones on the next block over that are speeding. So it's kind of too bad that all this effort is just to make people do what they should be doing anyway.
Yeah, I know.
That's just a comment.
In the case of the one project that was rejected, or the card, I wonder if the pool of people voting had been a block off the street or off that main street. I think it was in Ward 2, Linda. I think was the
It was
project.
in Ward 2, but, in that particular one, the neighborhood association thought that they needed to have traffic calming on all the streets, and so that's why they went to Jeff. But the people that lived on the street had no concerns. At least from what I have been
Yeah.
told and the neighbors
Yeah.
that I've talked to.
Yeah.
And were
Well, anyway,
specifically
I'm
solicited
just
by
kinda-
one person,
It would.
and received solicitation from one person in opposition.
Yeah, I just wondered if it was a fair assessment. So anyway,
I just think you can only go so far, and the time and the limit, because again, we are doing this to keep people just to follow the law and have them slow down. So if everybody would go the speed limit, we probably wouldn't need speed humps, and we wouldn't be spending all this time. Or money to make it safer when they all, when you hear some of the speeds on side streets, it's really unbelievable.
yeah, I believe I shared with all the council members when there were the mayor and the 5 council members earlier in the year. Sorry, Jeff or Mike, you weren't on board yet, but the program in Detroit where I think they put in what was it?
10,000, was it?
10,
I thought it
Well,
was 10.
10,000.
Whatever it was, they should have.
10,000 speed humps, and I think we had put in 29 in the same period. So
54.
yeah,
Well, then you almost should build a road. You should build a road with speed humps already in it. Be prepared. I mean, that's what it's getting to. If you're putting that many in.
well, they think that it's working, and they use it, and they are
How much?
the staff do the speed humps.
Yeah,
Well,
but still the cost and the time and everything, it is really too bad you have to do it. So that's,
I have a question, if that's all right.
yes.
Without asking you to go into a lot of detail, tell me the order of, like, when you go to the neighborhood association, when the card goes out, and, sorry to focus in on one, but we had an exchange about 47th Street between Urbandale and Hickman.
Hickman.
But we never got to, I think, a survey.
So the project is first initiated in one of those 3 ways, through
Yeah.
mayor or council member, through the neighborhood association, or through the folks who live on that street. So in that instance, the request came in via your email, I believe, and the second step is to go out and collect the data. We did go out and collect the data, so that's traffic study, those green ones that were on that map.
Okay,
And so we collect the data and see whether the speed and volume characteristics make it eligible for further consideration through the program. Based on, I can't remember the specifics, I know certainly the speed characteristics were within 5 miles an hour of that 85th percentile speed. I can't recall about the volume where it was on that particular street, but I feel like both the speed and volume were within acceptable parameters.
and so that's that's how you put, like, the little cables down and they measured.
Yep, rather than the pneumatic tubes, we use a radar that's
Okay.
that mounted up on a telephone pole or a street lamp or something like that,
Okay.
and it's more inconspicuous so that we get an accurate reflection of what people are doing. So
Yeah.
versus, say, for example, a speed feedback sign that you've seen deployed in a number of locations across the city, it gives you a more true reading of what people are doing when they're not being observed.
Yeah,
When you see the tubes on the street, it might slow down a little bit.
yeah. And so request the quick study Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I think you said. And then depending on those results, if they fit kind of the engineering criteria,
Then we go to the neighborhood association, and then we go back to the neighborhood association a second time, if, according to the old policy, or the old method, and then send out the survey card after we have an approved concept plan from the neighborhood association. So that project got truncated at the point where it was no longer eligible for further consideration through the program.
is there any history of like a safety valve where there's new circumstances or something that doesn't fit those first two criteria about traffic volumes or speed? I mean, or has every project then be just
Yeah, I think that goes
hit
back.
the speed bump?
Yeah, so that goes back to the lessons learned, that we treat all projects consistently. We have our criteria, and we follow our process. So, no, not really.
Yeah.
We do have a provision that you can come back if there's continued concerns. You can come back after a period of 3 years.
Yeah.
And say, can you take a fresh look at this? We feel like things have changed, or it's really gotten worse, or whatever the situation may be.
Yeah. I appreciate that. So like another project, and many of you are familiar with this, at 42nd and Forest, we're probably not going to get speeds because, and we've talked about that needing traffic calming, but that wouldn't fit the speeds because you're coming up to a stop sign.
It's a different issue on that.
Yeah, how do you?
I may defer to Steve if you want an answer on that one.
Okay.
So at 42nd and Forest, we've been meeting the field with the property owner there. That is is really people are just blowing through the stop sign and crashing into the person's front yard. And
Right.
it's been obscene high number of people doing that. And so we're looking at more of a visual deterrence there from at the stop sign, doing a median, so that way you kind of, to bring the stop signs even further out, and kind of create that visual, like, oh, I'm coming up to an intersection, almost similar to the concepts that you see sometimes used in kind of rural country roads, where you come up to a T intersection where you have a median in the middle to kind of say, hey, here's the T intersection coming up. So that's more of a response to the crashes as opposed to the and that's not to say people aren't speeding during those, but to be honest, some of them have been
So that might be the
impaired.
one safety valve of accidents or.
That's more of a kind of more of a safety component of that's not really part of this program. It's not part of this program. That's actually going.
The number of accidents there is unbelievable, but I don't think it's as high as a property in your ward, Joe, which has similar.
That was
Oh,
that
I
was
think I
11
heard
in the
that
past year. Yeah,
Douglas and
Was
Lacey.
that Southeast 22nd?
yeah.
He's very happy about getting something done.
At least 4 times in the winter, they go around the curve.
But that actually involved
11
calming in
people
the
going to his
street
yard.
too.
Yeah.
Right.
But, yeah, a gentleman had, I think, 11 cars in his yard?
We've been out.
In the past few years, it's been it's bizarre.
There's a slight enough curve that I think people just miss. There's a little bit of one, yeah.
Yeah, I don't need an award for that.
There's the East fancy.
So
Right.
Let's do the last
All
slide.
right.
I'm interested in.
Here's the last slide. This is Des Moines, Iowa, with the palm trees in the background.
Yeah, that's good.
Sorry, I don't have any photographs of construction in progress. As Councilmember Voss asked earlier, there was a question that came up at a previous, I believe it was a council work session, I may be wrong, but some session where you had asked, or somebody in the council had asked about whether or not Public Works would be able to install the speed humps, because as you mentioned, they're made out of asphalt. Perhaps we have the capacity, the knowledge to implement something like that. We did engineering touch base with Public Works, with Jonathan Gano and his team. Not see Jonathan here this morning, but the question was, would they be capable of implementing these speed humps if that's a direction that was designated by council? And the short answer is yes, they can do it. Their preference is to continue to focus on street maintenance, not new assets. They're willing to complete a proof of concept project. In other words, if you say, put out this street or those two streets or this many humps or whatever it is that you choose, they can do it. And with that information, they can come back and say, it cost this much money, it took this much time, it was this much effort, and then they have a benchmark against which they can compare it to what we pay to contractors. Today, when we put this out to bid, we see a price of approximately $5,000 per speed hump. So that's, again, construction cost only, not staff time, not design, et cetera, et cetera. That does not include signing and striping. So again, if we have our public works crew go out there and do the implementation of the actual hump itself, we'd still have to sort out what happens with signing and striping.
How much is material? How much is just the material out of that 5,000?
It's a good question.
I don't know. That's what Public Works will be able to determine if they do a proof of concept project.
We don't know what the material costs compared to labor?
It's more labor.
Right. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that, to my point, 5,000 per hump, and what, 10% of it's the material? Right, okay. Point well taken, I hope.
And then finally, the question is, if we are to put our Public Works crew on this, then what is it that they're being pulled off of? What are they not accomplishing? And again, after a project is done, if Public Works does a project, then they can come back with costs, and then they can come back with that opportunity cost of what they would or would not do.
But we have a crew that does overlay with blacktop, that's very familiar with working with blacktop.
They're correct. Asphalt. They're doing less overlays, more inlays. Correct.
Yep.
I think that's something we can look
So,
into.
yep. And so the Director Gano was, yeah, he's not voluntarily committing to perpetually do all these speed humps, but he's willing to try out 3 or 5 to actually gauge what is the effort, how long does it take him, how much, and then what would be taken away, from doing
I mean, and that's great, but as you know, and as all of us know, the more you do, the better you're going to get at it, and the quicker you're going to get at it. Doing 1 to 3, it's probably going to take the longest time to figure out, a good system of how to do that. But going forward, after you get a good system, I would think that the cost and the labor costs would come down because you would know how to do it much better. And so, I mean, 1 to 3, yeah, sure, we can look at that, but that really isn't going to be a tall tale. I mean, that's not going to tell the story for me.
I think it's more just how long does it take him to do a
It's
few, and then how it gets done, versus.
But don't you agree the first 3 to 5 is probably going to take the longest until you figure out how to do it and figure out a good system and how to, maybe
Yeah.
do it a little quicker?
And I think the question that Joe is getting at, I mean, this goes to Councilmember Pullman's point too. We have a regular stream, right? We're committing $150,000 a year to these projects. The question is, are we going to get more bang for the buck if we bid them out every year? Or
just take them over.
do we hire a couple of folks and have that be part of a crew that does at least the speed bump portion of this, and like help us understand what's going to be most cost effective.
And again, I have a message into Director Brunridge at City of Detroit and Deputy Director Kanyeme at City of Detroit to try and figure out what they're at, because they did 10,000 in the past 7 years. I haven't confirmed if they are doing it in-house or not. They say public works improvements, but we do public works improvements by contract. So to see exactly how they do that, again, it still kind of comes back to prioritization, right? I mean, if if it's adding a crew to do the work, then we got to think about what, as Scott mentioned earlier, what are those folks doing during the off season, right? You're not going to put these down, October through March, right? So what are they doing during that time frame? Again, Detroit does prefabricated rubber, and they also do asphalt. That's what they use. And so we've got worked with standards on doing speed cushions that are prefabricated rubber that you can just bolt down, and then we also have them for asphalt. But again, if it's not just adding crews to do this, then we got to determine. That's what Director Gano was offered to do with doing the 3 of these or so, is to figure out how long and then what goes away. If our priorities are neighborhood speeding, then it's more resources toward neighborhood speeding. If it's pulling people away, well, then we're obviously pulling them away from doing inlays and potholes and those other things. And so it's just, where do we want to put our resources on this? And that's kind of when we talk about why we have benchmarks. You know, if the neighborhood, if all the neighbors do a petition and vote something down, well, we have enough to do. Why not go somewhere else, right? I mean, we have plenty of these to do. So it's just all, you know, where does this fall in the priorities of all the things we do? So.
And how many are we doing a year?
What would you say, 54 in the past 5? Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So-
speed humps. But.
So would 10 speed humps a year require an additional crew?
No, I wouldn't think it would be an extra, you know.
I think they're going to come
It-
back. Are they going to?
My speculation, though, is, to be honest with you, that, I mean, our public works staff are not free, right? They're paid employees. They have equipment, you know, and so their time is not free. And so, to be honest with you, the 5,000, if I had to guess, it's probably more like it comes in pretty close, you know, 4,000, you know, so it's not like it's, you know, it's going to cut it in more than half, you know, but.
Steve, so I'm working my way towards what resources city needs. How durable are the asphalt humps? And how much, like now we've had some for 4 or 5 years. We've plowed them. How are they holding up, and who's repairing them?
I'm not sure if we've had enough 5 years that we've had to repair. The ones I'd put in Illinois, I want to say we rebuilt them between 10 and 15 years is when because then they kind of get chipped at the front, and so then we had to kind of repave the ramp up to the hump, if you will. It's kind of more like a table almost, and so we had to kind of repave the front ramp on a number of these in DeKalb, Illinois. So, I don't know, Dave, if you had any? Yeah. So we try when we build the asphalt ones, we mill down a joint so that way the surface blends in with the existing surface to try and minimize that damp, you know.
And you have a standard that the humps are supposed to be X high. And
Yep. 4 inches is typical standard. So yeah, the old standard was 3.5, and now we've gone to 4. But yeah, that's what they're supposed to be. So it's
are the contractors following that?
we've had some issues. Let's put it that way. You know. For the most part. Yeah, for the most part.
And the stormwater has to flow between the curb and...
So that's the benefit of the actual speed humps, is the speed humps taper down at the curbs, so then it doesn't affect the drainage, where the raised crosswalks, again, while the raised crosswalk serves the benefit of an actual dedicated kind of highlight in the crossing, the raised crosswalk is a solid a consistent elevation. So you've got to accommodate the drainage, because it'll block the drainage if it's, say, put on the downhill end. So. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Okay, with that,
Is that-
I think we are done. So we will reconvene for our regular meeting. I believe 4:50 we start. So we will see you at 4:45. Okay, 4:45, be back. With that, we will see you later.